Welcome to another episode of Monster Monday from the Ready to Die channel. This series explores the design of a creature I have built for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. The stat block for this creature can be found over on the Monster Monday blog, as well as the Twitter and Discord, all of which are linked below. I am back from my vacation, and I haven't entirely given up on Halloween. In celebration and fond remembrance of this recent holiday, we've got the dark and disturbing danger, the Slasher Tormentor, for this week's Monster Monday. A while back, I explored a bit of my own setting with the Slasher Brute, a low-level manifestation of the Dark. This is a primordial deity of my world that covers domains of fear and the void. In my setting, the Dark has been detained, prevented from sinking the world into a lifeless, stagnant void. But it is able to slip pieces of itself through its prison, forming into creatures such as the Slashers. Now, whereas the Brute was a straightforward, albeit fear-focused fighter, meant to menace isolated communities, the Tormentor is a mid-level threat that moves pieces in a grand scheme to their progenitor's will, and occasionally their own as well. For a point of reference, where Brutes are more along the lines of Michael Myers or Jason Voorhees, Tormentors are styled more after the likes of Pinhead and Freddy Krueger. In designing the Tormentor, I knew I wanted to include spells like Nightmare and Phantasmal Killer, or Visions of Danger, as it's now known. With that knowledge, I looked at them and they are both 4th rank spells, so I wanted a minimum of level 8, and I had some design space right around 10th level, leading to me to place this creature there. Like the Brute before it, the Tormentor uses the Aberration and Fiend traits, which will be standard traits across all slashers I make, tying into the alien and wicked nature of their creator. That all said, let's take it to the top for our terrifying Tormentor. Building off of that description, I intended to design the Tormentor as a spellcaster, and with it being a manipulator, I decided to build it with an extreme charisma. Innate spells tend to scale off of charisma for player characters, and this creature also needs it to mundanely menace munchkins. I envision Tormentors as generally being rather slender and nimble, leading to a dexterity that sits between a moderate and high value, which will be important for any strikes that it wants to make. It does still tend to have a mental focus to it, with a moderate intelligence and wisdom, while its strength sits at a cozy point between low and moderate. This leaves its constitution at low, again fitting its more cerebral nature. I only went for a moderate perception bonus because these sorts of killers classically become too arrogant or too certain of their success, they miss small details that inevitably lead to their downfall. That leaves us with the Tormentor skills, and there's quite a few to the Tormentor's name. Its focus is as a manipulator, leading to an extreme deception and a high intimidation. But it's also decently dexterous and a caster. To shore up those aspects, it uses a moderate acrobatics, occultism, and stealth, the last of which might be important for closing on potential victims. It rounds out its skills with a low athletics and survival, mostly for the fact that athletics is something seen on most creatures, and survival does play an aspect in its kit, which we will see deeper in the build. Despite its power, the Tormentor's defenses are pretty basic. They're nice and straightforward, so that it can be a bit more packed elsewhere. We start off with a moderate armor class. This means that a Tormentor shouldn't be too hard to land a hit on, but it's unlikely that players will be attacking it at their full bonus. The Slasher has an array of effects to penalize its victims, which can make players sweat just to hit that moderate AC. Partially because of that factor, it only uses a low pool of hit points, and lacks any sorts of resistances or weaknesses. Depending on the different inspirations you look at for the Tormentor, you could justify a weakness or a resistance to mental damage, depending on how you want to argue it, but I just kept away from it at this time. This leaves us with its saving throws, and I felt a high will save was a right call with it being a caster equipped with a decent wisdom. Its higher dexterity affords it a moderate reflex, but its fortitude is low, matching that low constitution that it has. And that is it actually, nice and easy. No fuss, no mess when it comes to defenses. And to be totally honest, its offensive abilities aren't too crazy either. It only has its talons to call upon, which have the Agile and Finesse trait, so that it can use its dexterity to fight with. These talons have a moderate attack bonus, accompanying damage in between low and moderate. Like I said, there's not much to it. The Tormentor's focus is not on its strikes, and with its ability to debilitate others, it has the chance of swinging fights to its advantage. I did consider including a venom or something similar on the claws that inflicted nightmares on the victims, but I decided to leave that to its spells, which I suppose we should talk about. For its array of innate occult spells, I used a DC value in between high and extreme, keeping in line with the suggestions of the spellcaster roadmap. I also kept to a theme with the Tormentor spells, placing a focus on fear and mentally damaging spells. This is perhaps most clearly seen with its at-will first-rank Fear and its at-will Nightmare spell. It can play allies against each other with Paranoia, inflict illusory maimings with Teeth to Terror, and even entrap and mislead the victims with Lose the Path, which also grants them a fun reaction. These all provide some nice ancillary options alongside the promised Vision of Danger, but the Tormentor's one other at-will spell is Mind Reading. This is meant to set up some other aspects of the Tormentor's kit, but perhaps most importantly, at least thematically, it lets it find the vulnerabilities of its victims, the pressure points to make them squirm and hurt, because while the Brute is about the sudden and violent cessation of life, the Tormentor, true to its name, wants to draw out the pain of its victims. When it comes to the abilities for the Tormentor, an important part is change shape. This is pretty basic, and I honestly borrowed a lot of the wording for it from the Doppelganger. But I did add that the Tormentor can base its shape off of creatures it sees in the minds of others, and that it also suppresses its aura while it is transformed. Before we talk about that aforementioned aura, I want to discuss the unique reaction that the Tormentor gains access to while under the guise of somebody's loved one, or somebody of at least some import to that target, and that is Gruesome End. The Tormentor can seemingly horrifically slay its adopted form, while returning to its true self, forcing those that witness the display to make a will save against a high DC. Failure leaves them sickened, based on the grotesqueness of the scene, but for somebody that was actually tied to the form that the Tormentor had taken on, their save will be 1 degree worse. And this is where it's important for the Tormentor to read the minds of its victims and prepare an appropriate shape to approach them in. Now, once the Tormentor has revealed its true form, it also unveils its frightful presence. This is a pretty standard aura. You will see it on dragons and a host of other creatures, and it can leave creatures in its aura, well, frightened. Characters only make 1 save per minute against this effect, which uses a moderate DC, and gives the Tormentor a second chance to inflict team-wide debuffs. Now before it does all that, Tormentor probably wants to start off with the one action that it shares with the Slasher Brute, the Fixate action. This draws a lot from the Ranger's Hunt Prey, but where the Brute was more of a precision ranger, the Tormentor actually ends up drawing on the new Ranger Edge, the Vindicator, with the fact that its fixation takes a penalty on spells and saving throws that the Tormentor inflicts. In theory, you'll want to start the Tormentor off under the guise of something else, and use the time before combat begins to fixate on its victim. Then it can use Gruesome End so that they have that penalty on their save against this effect, and also on its Frightful Presence. If it can get its Frightful Presence to stick, or at least frighten a creature with a spell or demoralize action, it can follow that up with Gaze into the Abyss. This effect is inspired by that blank face that my slashers have, an expression of the void that fills up their shells. While the Brutes can't tap into it, the Tormentors can channel this link to their god to fill others with terror, requiring them to make a high DC will save. Succeeding means that they can reduce their fighting value below 1, while failing will increase their fighting value and stick them with that success effect. Finally, critically failing the saves sends the victim running on top of all that. The issue I always have with the frighting condition is that creatures recover from it, which I do like thematically, but this ability is included mainly so the Tormentor can keep its victims terrified to serve as offerings for its dark god. You may actually want to think of the Tormentors as sorts of priests or acolytes of the dark. and that's not too far off. In fact, Tormentors tend to be so devoted to their devious deity that they revel in terror. They feel fear and the like, but celebrate it, becoming quickened for as long as they are frightened. This is actually a little inspired by Pinhead, a character who's intended to derive as much pleasure from receiving pain as he gets from inflicting it. Except, translated to the Tormentor's personal focus on fear rather than pain. That is about the sum of this serial slasher. A tutor in terror, this Tormentor tantalizes targets before tearing and taunting the team with tragic twists and tales. This is a bit too high of a level to include with Brutes, so I might make a midway point between the two slashers. But for now, this fearsome foe could fit fantastically in a social counter, before it descends into a brutal brouhaha. Until I come up with another slasher, you might have to settle on something else to back up this creepy caster. Maybe taking some inspiration from Pinhead's fellow Cenobites. Be sure to let me know what you think of this monster, as well as what others you'd like to see in a comment. You can check out the other versions of this creature, or the other monsters I've made, like the Slasher Brute, over on the Monster Monday blog, Twitter, or Discord, which are all linked in the description below. Thanks for watching, and have a monstrous Monday.